is an important role. There has to be a lot of people that are really like ear to the ground, for sure, for this to come to fruition. And yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff that's happening right now, guys, with the COVID stuff, and of course, there's a lot of other parties and other things going on, of course. So we can definitely tie that all in today. In terms of announcements from Unify the West, not too much. We're basically working on. We've got our new logo, our new platform, our new server set up. It's going pretty well so far. We're planning on doing some Zoom meetings every Thursday at 7 p.m. We're going to do a Zoom meeting. I think if this week works out, we'll do one this week and try and give that platform a shot and see if we can't expand our audience that way. Of course, other things that we're doing, we're working on getting the trademark and other things like that. So a lot of stuff going on in the background in terms of work that has to get done. Definitely going to be keeping you guys updated as that comes up. And yeah, from that's pretty much all I had to say in terms of updates for now. So I'll hand it off to CW, and he'll be putting up a presentation. It's a go live presentation, so please join the stream so you can follow along. Thanks, guys.
Okay, I'm muted.
Go ahead,
All right.
CW.
Okay. Can everyone see that? Is that good?
It's good.
Yeah,
Okay,
I can see
perfect. Okay, I'd like to thank Unify the West for having me out, and I'm always love to get out and talk to people about Alberta independence. It's important just to encourage everyone just to get as educated as much as you can as quickly as possible, because the ability for you to send that via word of mouth to the next person may mean the difference between whether or not we can be successful in creating independence or not. It's going to be very important over the next little while to get as many people up to speed on the benefits of independence and why the risks of staying are far greater than the risks of leaving. And so I encourage you to get as educated as you can. I know it can be, I know for me, it's pretty disheartening at sometimes seeing everything that's going on and not being able to feel like you can actually do something about it. And we're subject to listening to the current, I'll call it federalist politicians and career politicians that are making a bunch of noise, but not doing anything for Alberta. So I'm going to talk about the Alberta context more so, but I'm certainly one for the West and would love to see the West come together. But I also believe that in order for it to all work, at the end of the day, Alberta needs to go first. It's the way to cut the head off the snake, and so once that happens as a separate sovereign entity, I'm pretty much certain that Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and others are going to see BC are going to see the light to why it's great and the opportunities are great. So I'm going to just kick off here, and again, just to make note that there's a lot of new things emerging with respect to, I'll call it parties, what's going on in different parties, political parties, but also advocacy groups and third party entities that are coming together. I sit on a group that represents about 100,000 Albertans. And we've got a lot of actions going right now that are very constructive that I think are going to lend itself to moving us forward in a much more accelerated fashion. So I hope to touch on that a little bit as we go. So let me just see if I can get this up and running here and working. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to really talk, it's like common sense, 7-step plan to independence and how we can get there in a normal fashion. And I know that, there's a lot of people out there that want to see things happen faster, as do I. I'd love to see a vote for independence tomorrow and for it to be successful. But I think chances are if we actually ran that vote today, we probably wouldn't get there. We probably wouldn't win that vote, and it might set us back. So that's the importance of being educated, because the education will lend itself to people understanding why it's not only good for Alberta to move forward, but it's also going to be good for the rest of Canada. So I'm going to talk about that as well. All right, so let's just get into it right now. I always like to say to people that it really just boils down to one single thing, and that is that all you have to do is vote for independence. There's a lot of people that talk about, well, what about the Clarity Act? What about this? What about that? What about all these different things? And the answer is the technocrats, the bureaucrats, the career politicians, everybody else is all going to stay lined up over somewhere else because that's where they make their money. And so they're incentivized to stay with the status quo. So once we actually vote for independence, at that moment in time, things will shift significantly. All of those same bureaucrats, consultants, technocrats will all start to move behind us, and we'll be able to actually create the independent country that we want. So keep that in mind that you don't have to have all the answers. We just have to know why we're going to do it and what the benefits are. So that's an important thing to share with others. So I'm going to talk about a common sense plan to independence. So the first thing is there's a lot of talk about Jason Kenney will say constantly there's $20 billion that goes to Ottawa that never returns. Well, the simple real it's a net $41 billion that's sent by Alberta every single year that never returns. The real number is 50 billion, and there's about 9 billion of social transfers that actually comes back to Alberta and basically get our own money back. So the number is really $41 billion. So keep that number in mind. Don't focus on the 20 billion. It's 41 billion. If anybody tells you otherwise, we've done the math. So the 20 billion is really the equalization that's paid. And so just in simple terms, that's about a $5,000 for every person in Alberta that could be an independence dividend if we just vote for it. So are you ready to bring back the golden goose and the land of milk and honey once and for all and witness a prosperity never seen in Alberta? Now, if Alberta was a country of its own right now, would Alberta want to pay $41 billion per year to Ottawa to join Canada to be colony status, which is underrepresented in Parliament and the Senate, unable to unleash the prosperity of resource development for all Albertans with burdensome federal policies, and not able to pursue its own course of how Albertans want to govern themselves? Are you ready to find out 7 simple steps how we together can fix what has been rigged against us since 1905 to become a free and very prosperous country of our own? So just a little bit about myself. I'm actually a non-career politician. I'm a real estate developer. I've developed all sorts of real estate, but I've also been involved in the oil sands, chemicals, refining market. I've built about $300 million in projects from the ground up. I'm one of the original founding 44 members of the Alberta Independence Party. I ran in the last 2019 election in the riding of Calgary-Klein. I'm a board member. I was a board member with the Alberta Independence Party, actually, as the political strategy director, but just recently decided to broaden out the scope of what I'm doing in order to be able to, and that's with what I call albertaforall.com. But really, I participate with a lot of these larger groups to create some bigger activities that will ultimately broaden out the perspective and bring together a number of parties, a number of third-party advocacy groups, all of which is meant to accelerate getting the best path forward, because there's actually many paths forward that we could actually get there with, and it's just a question of which one's going to emerge quickest and what's going to be accepted the quickest by existing Albertans. So just a little bit about the Independence Party of Alberta. It was registered in 2019. It actually is the first and only political party committed to independence and committed to holding a referendum 120 days after forming government. Every other party hasn't really committed to that. This is the only one that actually does that at this moment in time. So in 2019, there were 63 candidates, just everyday Albertans, just like you and me, if you're from Alberta on the call. In the 2019 election, we came 5th overall. Obviously, we didn't get a big vote, but we never expected to, given the probably 4 years that people had been waiting once the Conservatives and the Wild Rose had merged to be able to vote for the UCP. So Anyways, to date, as it sits, there's an elected board of directors, a society with bylaws, and an operating and it has operations and governance capability right now, and is proceeding forward. So, what does the Independence Party stand for? 100% committed to independence. As I said, 120 days from forming government, we'll actually have a referendum on separation. The Alberta First Okay, that's Alberta First is the best path versus Wexit. While Wexit is Western in its path, we believe that Alberta needs to go first, and so that's one of the key elements of the party itself. The Oath of Rights and Freedoms we also think is an excellent thing that was adopted. And basically, to keep it simple, the Oath of Rights and Freedoms is basically that people can do what they want to do as long as they're not a threat to others, and that's where it shifts. Now, it's also important to note that Albertans in general are common sense folk, fiscally prudent, generally conservative, efficient, lean government, but socially pragmatic, looking to provide great social services, healthcare, education. And so being socially pragmatic is key in all of this in order to have, I'll call it the widest swath of um, um, program policy in order to be able to attract 50 to 60% of the population to vote for independence. So it's just a simple common sense platform, and you can go to abindependence.com. You can find the platform there that has been put together and was actually used in the last election. So I always say the only way colonies rise up and form a nation is when we, the people, make the decision to do it. So as I said before, all you need to do is vote. The rest of it is details, and the people will follow behind to help us get there. So some 1905 context, I think it's important just to note, and I'm not going to go through everything in detail here, but basically Frederick Haltane originally proposed the province of Buffalo would be formed. Wilfrid Laurier, seeing that the Alberta and Saskatchewan actually would be a powerful force in future, split them in two and actually underrepresented them in terms of the representation in Parliament and such. And as a result, really left us in much more of a colony status as it sits today. So a liberal government formed in 1905. And then after that, within months of forming the Social Credit Party during the Depression, William Aberhart formed a majority government, and the Alberta Treasury Branch, which is the Alberta Bank, was formed. Now, it might be important just to note here that it was only a few months that the Social Credit Party at the time was formed that a majority government occurred right away. So while you may be disheartened that maybe we don't get there quick enough for Alberta independence, we may actually get there very quickly because the watershed moments and the things that are happening out in Alberta and the very much disheartened Albertans and what's going on with joblessness, suicides, all of which I have seen personally occur, suggests that we could actually get there pretty quickly. Equalization program started in 1957. Since then, with the Quebec separation referendum, this equalization program has pretty much turned into a political influence, vote-getting activity, which is why we now have $20 billion and $13 billion of it goes to Quebec every year. And I think that's actually well understated because I'm sure a lot of the other monies in terms of capital grants and otherwise are going to Quebec as well. So we're really just propping up that economy that we don't have to because at the end of the day, it's not structured. The equalization program is not structured actually to give any incentive for those that are actually, I'll call it parasites, sucking off the system to actually develop their own resources, nor is things like hydro, electricity in Quebec part of the program to do the calculation. So as a result, it's a very, very uneven way of approaching it, which is why we have such a problem today. So Alberta today has the highest provincial GDP per capita. You can see it there, about $80,000 per person. We have the youngest, most skilled, highest paid population that's basically subsidizing the rest of Canada. That's the oldest, least skilled, and lowest paid population. So the bottom line is they need us. We don't need them. We're a resource-based economy. We have to look at it and say this is not an issue. There's a lot of globalist efforts through carbon taxes and otherwise to discount our resource economy. But there's a lot more play than just simply that. The Americans have played us pretty well in order to shut us down through their not through the various non-government organizations that have been funded and such. So we have to get our shit together, basically. Excuse my language, and start to develop multilateral agreements and things that reduce our reliance on the United States in order for us to prosper long term. So we're funding $41 billion. We're the largest net. We're underrepresented, and the federal public sector services for Alberta, um, um, as it sits today, a lot of the services are provided elsewhere, and that's an element we need to start bringing back to our particular our. So today we have an appointed ineffective Senate. There's federal policies that limit Alberta's ability to develop its own resources. We have landlocked resources by policy, not by choice. From our perspective, major threats to shut down our golden goose. Debt 2023 is actually headed for about 107 billion, probably more now that we have the COVID and the economic downturn associated with that, which means we're going to have more debt servicing, which is just all going in the wrong direction. So today we have a constitutional monarchy with all these various elements, but the bottom line is there's really no longer democracy that works for Alberta because we just don't have the representation, and nor do we have a triple E Senate that could have actually solved the Bill C-48, C-69 destructive policies. Likely would have not gone through if we actually had that Senate capability. I just spoke to it here. So at the end of the day, it's just very partisan, very slow. People remain until age 75 in there. As it sits right now, to change the Senate is virtually impossible because we have 7 of the 10 provinces are actually sucking money from the equalization program. Those 7 of 10 need to vote actually to change the Senate, which makes it virtually impossible to be able to do that. So that's effectively why C-48, C-69, and the Trans Mountain Pipeline fiascos are all there. We could have resolved that if we had a proper Senate capability. I'm not going to do too much here. House of Commons, again, we're underrepresented. 10% of the seats. We represent 15% of the GDP, and we have no way to actually properly be represented. So what are our options? Well, our options are, number one, we could do nothing, be subject to colony status, which you can see right now is what's happening. We're getting crushed in this economy, and we could be doing things completely on our own, and we would be much better off. So as it sits right now, we're headed down quickly with no end in sight. Other than Jason Kenney is at this point just announced, of course, going to spend money to get the Keystone XL pipeline going. Those type infrastructure projects are probably a good thing right now in order to keep things moving. But the answer is not nationalizing or using government money in order to get things moving forward. We need to actually prosper. This is where the independence advantage makes sense. The second one is to negotiate a fair deal. Well, a fair deal is really just a repackaging of what they called the Alberta Agenda or the Firewall back in 2001. It essentially was just to repatriate services, get our own Alberta pension plan, and our own Alberta revenue agency in place. Jason Kenney has repackaged it, called it a fair deal, in order to try to see if something can come together with respect to that. I highly doubt that a fair deal will actually be the right deal. We will still maintain ourselves in colony status with any kind of fair deal, but at this point in time, just getting the repatriation of services is a key element that we need to get done, whether it's with Jason Kenney or not, because it's all a key element to getting to independence. Now, you hear a lot about the Buffalo Declaration. Brian Jean, Michelle Rempel talk about this. Really what it is constitutional reform within Canada and to try to attempt to address the inequality. Well, this really is not going to work. We're just going to waste time. It's just going to kick the can down the road. But it's just another way for the career politicians to keep this thing going for as long as possible. But as I said in one of my last slides, if we have 7 of the 10 provinces absorbing equalization, it's pretty hard to believe that those very same 7 of 10 are going to vote for a shift in Senate reform or equalization in itself. So that's pretty much a dead dog, and I just can't see why it's worth going down that path. But we may have to actually do it in order for Albertans to ultimately realize that Canada, Ottawa, just doesn't work. Therefore, they look to independence as the answer to move forward. So the fourth is, of course, to vote for a referendum on independence, and which at that point in time, once we've done that, we can actually provide the terms of acceptance to remain in Canada, in which case they likely would say no, and we declare independence. So what are the three, what we're hearing from people and where we get the most reaction to typically is, and while there's maybe a fourth, which is immigration, but three biggest fears are pensions, we're a landlocked country, and social services. So just to briefly look at that, seniors are actually safer with our own pension plan. And the reason is, the simplest reason is because for every dollar that's sent to Ottawa to the Canada Pension Plan, 64 cents gets returned. So if we keep and we create our own Alberta pension plan, we actually will be better off because that extra 36 cents is going back into our bank, not sitting over out in the east being used for the, as I mentioned to you before, the oldest population going. So we'll be much better off and we actually have a lower cost of administration. Seniors benefits can actually improve significantly. One of the policies in the Alberta Independence Party would have been that rather than the average senior getting $1,100 to $1,400 a month, they'd actually see as much as $2,388 a month with an additional top-up if they needed support living of about $850. So as you can see, that's a significant boost. Not only that, younger people will probably have their in this case, Alberta pension plan contributions reduced, which is good for young people. And of course, it means with a better pension plan, it means it'll actually be around for them when the time comes that they're actually going to be seen. Simple thing is that he who owns the gold rules. So it's important for us to take control of our economy and what's best for Albertans. Now, the only other point I want to make on that is the pension plan itself is the federal government has actually been talking about turning that into general revenue, going to make it in a government benefit. And that's a big risk because what that means is that just goes into general revenue, which means by the time Trudeau and all the career politicians have spent the money, there's not going to be anything left for seniors. So landlocked country, well, the simple truth is we're landlocked within Canada right now. There are means to be able to help ourselves. So I like to say that our greatest weakness is actually our greatest strength. So we're surely not being successful right now being a landlocked country sitting within a place where we have no representation. So we must be better off by being on our own and then being able to negotiate from a position of strength. There are international landlocked country agreements to get access to tidewater. There's 17 other countries that utilize that agreement. It's enforced by the UN Security Council, which is the real Security Council, the real entity that we actually like, as opposed to the UN itself, which we don't. So Alberta actually has negotiating strength as an independent country. BC, for example, would be locked out from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Their transportation itself is locked out. So our borders become all of a sudden a negotiating tool for us to be able to ultimately get the things that we need, which is the pipelines from to the west, probably pipelines to the east, and pipelines to the south going forward. Eagle Spirit pipelines, there's lots of alternatives. And of course, Plan B is the USA itself, although Alberta on its own will be much more prosperous and without anything prejudicial in terms of why would we want to actually, if we're having problems with the East and how they vote, and even some of the philosophies of what they're looking to be able to do, climate change and all these other things. Why would we want to actually shift one thing to the other and end up having the same kind of problem? So we're actually better off on our own, and I'll show you why that is very shortly. In terms of social services, services would be retained and actually improved. With the better tax structures, research and development of healthcare would probably be spurred as well. So we'd actually have better technology, better capability. But what's key is that the veterans, disabled, homeless would all be better taken care of in an independent Alberta because we'll be much more prosperous. So why is independence good for the rest of Canada? Well, first of all, the manufacturing environment that exists in the East really desires a low Canadian dollar. Well, as if we grow our oil and gas resources, typically what happens is the Canadian dollar rises due to the strength of exporting of those resources. So we're actually in contradiction, West versus East, in terms of what they want versus what we want. So they would much more prefer that we're not growing as much as we want so that they can have a better capability in the East. Now, this also allows the East to pursue its own social and immigration policies. We can have an immigration policy that is based on Alberta achieving full employment. So we'd say 3.75% unemployment rate, and really immigration stops right there. It's done for economic need. We do it on the basis that Albertans are first, and we take care of our own first, and then we can help others have the opportunity to join us based on the economic needs of our economy. It provides incentive for the rest of Canada to develop its own resources. So at the end of the day, the equalization dries up. They're going to have to start doing things differently. Now, the change itself will drive government efficiency, make them more competitive. They'll have to do that because, of course, the $41 billion won't be showing up anymore. But the other key element is that Alberta will unleash a prosperity that will be massive in terms of what it can do, because it's really just been held back by, I'll call it a mediocre Canada that's too slow and it's operating from Ottawa that doesn't see the potential in full way that we as Albertans could manage ourselves. So that'll create a great prosperity in Alberta, which will have spin-off benefits to the manufacturing growth for the rest of Canada. Again, don't forget this number, $41 billion per year that Ottawa never returns. That's what you want to be telling your friends. Now, equality for all Albertans. So this plays to Indigenous and non-Indigenous. We cannot forget that in order to be able to have an independent Alberta, we have to address the Indigenous component and peoples. So I know when we sit and we talk to people, first of all, the Indigenous folks, surely we can do better. And surely the Indigenous people can do better than they are currently through the Federal Indian Act and the lack of ability to actually meet what has been in those treaties for so long. Combined with that, I think at the end of the day, most Albertans are tired of special interests and their influence. And so the whole idea in independence is actually to create one where all people come together for equal opportunity as a one Alberta. It's an ideal opportunity to be able to do something different that has been problematic for years and years. And we've seen it recently, blockades and all the other issues that have been going on in Canada. Just to show the other benefits, the lowest taxes in North America. So in this case, that $20 billion could translate to every working Albertan would have zero tax up to $50,000 with a marginal tax rate of 20% over and above that. So as you can see, looking at it, someone making $50,000 will no longer pay any tax versus today, you'd pay about $8,600. So that's about $700 in your pocket every single month for anybody making around $20 to $25 an hour. For anybody making $100,000 an hour, again, the numbers are quite compelling. It's another $10,000 to $1,200 a month in your pocket that's going to get spent in Alberta for Alberta prosperity, which is going to create a lot of jobs. Standard of living will definitely go up as a result. Okay, we sit right now at like number 9. If you look at it versus Canada is around 17. Canada would probably fall off the map once Alberta goes independent. And at the end of the day, we would have the ability to unleash our resource potential to potentially go from 4 to 10 million barrels a day. And at the end of the day, the tax benefits alone would drive a significant benefit to Alberta, moving it up to about the top 5 virtually overnight. So just to show how the money rolls, $41 billion a year goes to Ottawa. 20 billion per year is returned to Albertans through low taxes. And that would translate to at about a four multiplier to about an $80 billion GDP boom that would happen overnight, creating between 100 to 160,000 jobs right away, many of which will be for younger Albertans who have been suffering 20 to 25% unemployment. So it would fill up that deficit virtually overnight. So immediate job creation, border police, military jobs for young people, massive services and non-skilled labor increases for consumer spending would be immediate, and the diversification from the lowest tax regime in North America would drive business investment. So aerospace, vehicles, technology, healthcare innovation, energy research, all of these things are high value added jobs that are going to be significant for Alberta and drive a massive prosperity boom. Not to mention hundreds of billions of dollars of investment capital in resource development now that we're not inhibited by the destructive policies of Canada. Elimination of job-killing taxes. No Kenny UCP CPC industrial emitters tax. This will ultimately reduce inflation, reduce the cost of electricity and anything to consumers. Because right now, as it's today, we got a tax in Alberta, and we have a tax from the federal government. It's just ridiculous. No GST as well, so that'll be gone. We can create mortgage policies for Albertans, so we can eliminate policies driven for basically Vancouver and Toronto have had so much immigration, up 350,000 people a year, that's driving the need for more housing, driving costs up, which the federal government put a 2% mortgage stress test on that only affected us. Carbon tax, as you can see, 2023, we vote for a referendum, boom, we got no carbon tax forever. The prosperity would go up. We'd have immediate tax relief, and with this consumer-driven GDP boom, diversification would occur as well, because we'd have the lowest taxes, both personal and business, in all of North America. We are virtually a tax-free zone that's going to drive significant investment into Alberta. And then, of course, the ethical resource growth that we will plunge right into. That'll give us the independence advantage. So financial prosperity, elimination of 100 debt within about 5 years, elimination of debt servicing, which means more money can be used for social services or to reduce taxes even more. Stable and sustainable municipal funding. So for the city of Calgary, for example, which has 26 different ridings out of the 87, it'd represent another $936 million that could be used for developing infrastructure, building LRTs, green lines, you name it, could all happen as a result. And then we create, of course, the Alberta Sovereign Fund and get back on track. So learning from the Quebec experience to win is very important. So it's important to align efforts, use resources effectively. I think there's 3 aspects to things that are happening right now. One is, I'll say, the Alberta Independence Party, but there are other parties out there. For Alberta, that's the focus. And then there's the movement itself. So Unify the West, Wexit, a number of different third-party advocacies that are out, are all creating an overall broad movement that's putting political pressure and momentum for things to move forward. And then, of course, the West Federal Party, Federal Voice, which is Wexit Canada. The elements of the Oath of Rights and Freedoms, the fiscally socially pragmatic policies, common sense platforms, all important in order to be able to get to what's the 50 to 60% of the people that we need in order to successful road. Now, one of the things that occurred within Quebec was that they achieved their very close to independence. But one of the things that happened in the end is that they focused so much on the people that they knew would vote for independence that they forgot about the uncommitted and undecided voters. So I spoke with Preston Manning around this, and so the key focus is around getting people educated as possible and getting as many people out as possible in order to be able to vote for prosperity. We need grassroots First Nations support. There's obviously a lot of um, different levels of types of folks. So who's running? Who's the elected Indigenous? Who are the hereditary everyday Indigenous folk? A lot of which don't necessarily receive the ultimate benefits and funding of the treaties and otherwise today. So we need to actually build from bottom up in order to make that successful. And then, of course, the social mood and the right events occur in order for things to all come together.
So something I was going to quickly cut in on there.
Sure.
One of the reasons that Quebec didn't end up getting its independence, one of the reasons, obviously there were several, but one of the big hiccups that they had is as you said, they didn't focus enough on the voters who were undecided. A lot of those undecided voters happened to be Indigenous, and so they lacked a lot of the Indigenous support that they needed.
Right.
So that's going to be
Absolutely.
key.
Absolutely. So I'll show you in my next few slides here how we should approach that from the steps. So some folks will say, like I said, there's 7 steps, but why not 2? Why don't we just hoist our flag and declare independence? Well, personally, I would love that to happen. I would be standing there right tomorrow. We could make that happen. And there's many that could say even through constitutional aspects and the Statute of Westminster that right now as it sits from 1931, we basically are our own country. We just need to declare it. And I'm happy that those folks are out there right now pitching, putting all those things together, and even people going to court in order to validate it. I look forward to that, all moving everything forward. But I think what's key is that Albertans need to be ready. They need to be ready to vote for independence. We need to be able to decouple from Canada. That means we create autonomous capability that we can do things ourselves. We don't need Ottawa. We don't need federal public sector. We need to ensure that the Indigenous folk through One Alberta, we're all as Alberta forward. And we need to, I think at each step, Canada must reject Albertans' demands in order for the resolve for everyday Albertans to realize that it really is the right solution. So we actually need to go to the wall in order for people to see that the wall is not coming down from Ottawa. We're just going to get stonewalled. So therefore, they'll look back and say, well, I guess independence is the way to go. And that's when we ultimately get success. And then, of course, we need the essential elements as our own nation in order to be recognized. Now, so I'm just going to go through, I'll call it the 7 steps. So the first step is to have a registered political provincial party committed to independence. While we have that, we may even have a few more in the months coming. So that means getting registered, having your bylaws in place, having fully functional constituency associations, and that there's a qualified leadership to ready for. The second step is repatriation of services. So this is the Alberta Revenue Agency that will be able to collect revenues. This is the Alberta Pension Plan, the border police, having our own police force. All of these aspects are key elements that we need to start being able to do ourselves so that when we vote for independence, we have the capability to do it, and that international countries will actually recognize us as capable. So that involves a number of different things. But I've sort of touched on it. Arms control, our own immigration, our own provincial constitution. All of these things are being talked about in the advocacy group and the 100,000 folks that I speak with every Monday night. A referendum on equalization, step 3. This is the Kenney approach. So he right now says October 16, 2021, and I guess we'll hear shortly with the Fair Deal panel what the approach is here going forward. But the referendum on equalization, while it actually has no value because they'll never actually change it in order to eliminate those costs to Alberta, It may be something that needs to go to because number one, it'll allow Albertans to vote for something successfully, which is we do want to vote a referendum on equalization. And then secondly, it'll allow Albertans to actually see that the federal government and the other provinces won't actually do anything at all. So that's a key component to go to the wall with, I think, unless something changes. I spoke to that. So step 4 is the One Alberta Indigenous Independence Agreement. So it makes sense to actually have discussions and I'll call it an independence MOU or something that is in the event once we vote for independence and it's successful, then we can actually do detailed agreements and move forward. But we have the Indigenous folks and all of Albertans on side in order to move. So that's developing a path and a process cooperatively, conducting open meetings, developing common ground principles to address equality and opportunity for all, address long-standing issues that the Indigenous have had, create One Alberta, negotiate a framework, and sign an independence agreement subject to a referendum. Step 5, form provincial government and a referendum on independence within 120 days. So it's already 2020. Based on the current path with nothing changing, 2023 is actually the next point, Alberta, or April 2023, in order to be able to move that ahead. There are by-elections, there are opportunities. There's, as it sits right now, through the group that we're dealing with, we are looking at who might be folks even within the current government who might be possibly parties who might realize that Alberta is getting a raw deal. They're tired of it as well and might choose to want to cross the floor. We would love to see that happen before 2023. It will actually accelerate independence. And so I look forward to the day that that can happen. And I know that there are some activities and otherwise that are ongoing right now in that regard.
Well, and just to touch on that, I mean, there are many rural former Wild Rose MPs that are not happy right now, so we have to definitely take advantage of that discontent and hopefully maybe change the minds.
Absolutely, absolutely, and pressure on them in every single way. Every time there's an writing your MLA actually is effective because at least it tells you whether or not they're or whether they're just towing the party line. So right now, as it sits, it sounds. With the people that I know and the people that I've talked to, Kenny's got his iron grip around most MLAs. They aren't allowed to speak out on their own. Everything's got to go through Kenny's office. This is not the type of Republic of Alberta that I see as being successful in others. We want something that's grassroots, coming up from every riding, and ultimately representatives that represent the people, not Kenny representing Ottawa. All right, so step 6 is a 2 to 4 year transition to self-government. I know it sounds like a long period of time, but there's many things that have to happen in that. So we have trade agreements, transport of goods, national parks, Alberta's share of the national debt, military, currency, banking institutions, bondholders that we're dealing with, foreign relations. There's many aspects that have to happen. But ultimately, we when we're in that scenario, we're building and offering. We would actually have a scenario we could actually offer terms to remain in confederation, which would be our terms, in order for it to work. Because there may be some advantages to being our own, even if you look at it from Unify the West, to ultimately being a Western country. There may be some benefits to acting almost like call it the EU of countries. As a confederation of provinces versus straight independence without any common, because there's lots of common services that might actually make some sense, but maybe. Once we declare independence, of course, we get protection of the territory under the UN, which ensures that the Canada can't invade us because we'll be protected under that UN charter. And then, of course, step 7 is the international recognition. And in order to do that, you just have to meet certain standards, be it have a defined territory, have a permanent population, and have a government that's capable of operating on its own. We then declare independence, and we get recognition from international communities. And with the 2 to 4 years that we've spent getting there, it would be clearly demonstrated that we can operate as our own country. Right now, the U.S. There's no official policy, but the decision can actually be made by the President of the United States. In terms of timeline, that just shows all the 7 steps, ultimately moves out to 2027. I personally don't want it to last and take that long, but if I just take a logical approach based on what we know and what we actually have in terms of control of things, which is not a lot if we're not currently forming government, then we're actually likely faced with that kind of time frame. So what's the prosperity of the independence versus fighting for status quo? Well, it's about a $2.6 trillion in GDP growth, represents about $216 billion of increase. Now, today the economy is about 350, dependent upon the price of oil and a few other things. So as you can see, this is a significant jump in terms of the GDP, which is ultimately drives massive job creation. So I'm not going to go through this, but there's tax relief GDP growth right away from the tax reductions. We could have up to 6 million barrels a day of resource growth. The whole resource development growth is huge, as you can see. Diversification that occurs. And then, of course, the resource tax revenue growth is massive, which over a period of time adds up to another $55 billion per year, which actually today the current budget is around $57 billion. So we essentially double the tax revenue over that period of time. And it all results in massive job growth.
Okay. Did he cut off for everybody? Or just me? Uh-oh. I have no idea.
CW, I don't know if you're talking, but we're unable to hear you for some reason. Hello?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I could hear you, but his stream's down.
Yeah, it seems really awesome. So, we'll wait a few minutes while it returns. And do we want to dive into some of these questions then that have been asked in the town hall? I know a lot of them are for Alexander, but perhaps we can answer a few of those.
Are we back? Am I back?
Yeah, there we are. Yep,
Hey,
you're back.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I'm almost done. So
Yep, go ahead. Yeah, finish her up.
Right now, I will tell you that the group that I represent, that I'm involved in on Monday nights, are 100,000 people. We actually are pulling together a petition that brings the essential elements at a very generic level for independence. So we would create that petition, get our 100,000, whatever we need in order to be able to get it brought forward to the legislature. And we would actually put pressure on the government to actually move us towards an earlier independence date. So if you want to quickly get that going, Jake, you have your contacts and folks that we're going to ultimately need to get everybody who wants to get their petition, their specific name and information in to build the database, to move that to the legislature.
Is there a link that you have that you can provide us with? Like to the petition? Or
Must be what tell us. Having major network outages today.
yeah, no, it's true.
Nationwide, complete shutdown. Probably swapping over the 5G networks. Who knows?
Well, I'm worried about it. Not gonna lie. Seems the black robe might have been right.
Regarding tinfoil hat stuff, or are we
Slightly
go?
tinfoil hat stuff like black
You want to
knight.
dive into the tinfoil hat real quick? Talk about the prophecy of the Trump net shutdown for
Oh,
10 to
that's not
15
what I was going to
days.
get into.
The prophecy as of April 1st to Good Friday. Tomorrow's April 1st. Nets are going down. Ooh, the Q.
Everybody's
Ooh. Fear the Q.
everybody's muted, Jake.
That's
Well,
because they're not talking.
yeah, that's because they
muted
muted
ourselves.
themselves.
So let's talk about this here. I'm going to read a few of these things.
I
Seems
think
we have
CW's back.
Hello?
Hey,
We there?
how's it going? Yep.
All right, so let's do it.
Yep.
I'll pull this off. And
Bum, 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 bum.
okay, are we good?
Yep. We're good.
Really, I can't hear a word.
I'm open for questions now.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I will ask you Ammo's first question. I'm going to tag on a slight question to it as well. So, have you or your organization been in talks with U.S. representatives from either the adjoining state of Montana or State Department up to this point? And what would you be looking to get out of that relationship? Is what I would add on to that.
Okay, well, at this point in time, as far as the Independence Party of Alberta is concerned, the focus is 100% around educating Albertans and getting constituency associations up and running and getting the whole infrastructure ready to go. So, in terms of discussions with Montana, those elements have not been done at this point in time. So, I'm not sure how much further to comment than exactly that.
So the second question, I think you did kind of already answer his first question. How do you propose to secure Alberta sovereignty with the 7-step plan? But then he adds on, what measures for security are proposed or willing to go in order to hold sovereignty? So he's talking about the securing our borders and basically on an international level, presenting ourselves as a country that can defend itself.
Well, first of all, as it sits, the process lends itself, even with the existing, legislation and otherwise, towards a friendly departure. So I don't, at this point, see much issue with respect to that. We do have, upon declaring independence, the security from the actual UN Security Council itself. But regardless of that, I mean, right now you can, the borders can be secured with a contracted army for the funding and that what it would take to do that would be de minimis compared to the benefits of the $41 billion a year that we're currently sending to Ottawa. So that has been looked at a very cursory level. But at the end of the day, we'd fully be able to defend ourselves, whether it's through contracted army or the UN charter that already affords us that protection while we're negotiating, the various agreements with the rest of Canada.
All right, and then he says, okay, so the black robe. I'm trying to find his question here because he has. Okay, here we go. Seniors have previously protested that they would lose their pension in Ponzi schemes that they alone will benefit from. An individual rather than social security system would seem to be the way we can alleviate the need for elder care. This is where an individual maintains property rights to the contributions from himself, his employer, and wherein he can provide most of his own unemployment, disability, and retirement insurance and savings. to assist our elders, could we promise to fund them at least their current rate until people can establish private retirement funds? Can you speak to this?
That's a mouthful.
Yes, he has long rants.
I can't say that we've it's really been thought too much through, other than at this point, the security of an Alberta pension plan is a huge start in order to move to the next place. So there's no reason, in a new republic, and this is one of the things that at the last election, um, there's a, I would just say, almost a democratic void in a form of that, because an independence and a new country means a lot of things. It actually means that we can do things differently than we have ever done in the past. We aren't stuck to institutions and certain ways of doing things that we were in the past. I mean, prosperity that comes, private retirement plans, means of actually controlling assets associated with that. These are all things that can all be looked at. But I mean, everything is, I think, one step at a time. And at this point, there's just not enough. I think Albertans just need to know that, number one, they'll be safe with with withdrawing from the Canada Pension Plan and actually getting our funds from that and managed in Alberta, number one. And then number two, that the Alberta Pension Plan in itself will prosper far greater than if we keep going down the path that we have with the Canada Pension Plan. And then after that, it's a matter of voting for independence, at which point in time we have the ability to look at many, many other alternatives. But as it sits right now, I think it's a little too premature to try to suggest anything too much policy-wise, because it really actually, Albertans can vote for what they want at that point in time in a new republic in a different way than we have been able to in the past.
Yep, that's very true. So I have a question for you. How do you think that this current crisis that we're in, the COVID-19 crisis, is going to affect independence? And also, like, overall, what's your view on how the federal government has handled the crisis so far, as well as the potential implementation of the Emergencies Act?
Oh, okay. Well, the first thing is that, COVID, I know for me personally, and I know for a lot of people, it's been actually quite depressing. So just from a straight social mood perspective, there's that whole aspect that's created a bit of not apathy, but just basically feelings of hopelessness and despair, which we have to acknowledge. I mean, the economy itself is suffering significantly from this whole COVID crisis. The COVID crisis has created an economic crisis, which is actually probably greater than the COVID crisis. So, coming out of this, it's not usual that you see a bounce that's back to where we were, unless there's a lot of economic stimulus that's going to be applied by the various governments. We have seen that starting to occur, all sorts of quantitative easing and otherwise, in order to prop up the economy. So in terms of COVID itself, I mean, the approach that Canada took in many ways was very delayed. It's very simple. I mean, when you're in Ottawa, you're not thinking about what's happening in Alberta as much as you are about what's happening right around you. So I've been fairly vocal on my Facebook page and Twitter, saying that Alberta on its own as an independent country could have acted much differently than the federal government and even the current Kenney government has operated. I mean, career politicians are always apt to be motivated to the extreme in order to protect their job. And I think we could have done things a lot differently. We probably could have closed our borders virtually immediately. We would have a sovereign fund, and the economic prosperity that we have would give us a huge buffer to be able to do the things that we want to do without having to worry about the economy, so to speak. So from that perspective, we could support individual Albertans for 2, 3, 4 months just out of the, I'll call it the cash that would be available in our sovereign fund, So there would be really little to no impact at all from an economic perspective. And then secondly, we could certainly have immediately protected our seniors, isolated those that are the most vulnerable, the elderly, significantly, 2 to 4 months, which would have limited, if not eliminated, most of the problem related to COVID with the rest of the population, and we could have actually probably got back to work a lot quicker. So we took it. The federal government and the Kenney government took the approach that they did. It remains to be seen whether or not that is really an effective approach, because it's actually creating massive economic problems at the expense of not really, I'd say overkilling what's maybe not necessary. But I've had differing views on that, and I've had definitely a few people online trash me over those opinions. But overall, we'd be much better off economically with an independent Alberta, and our ability to act would be a lot quicker.
Well, and so I do like my last question there. You didn't necessarily touch on, which was the Emergencies Act. What's your opinion on the Emergencies Act, and what do you think will happen if it's implemented? In terms of like mainly like social like social perception.
Well, I think to do any kind of martial law or Emergencies Act is it's extreme for what we're dealing with right here. So personal freedoms, economic freedoms, I mean, I'm not an advocate for it at all. I don't think we need it. I don't think an independent Alberta would be much better off, would not have to implement such things. I mean, we're common sense. We're not focused around what the UN or the WHO is telling us to do. There's a lot of aspects of globalist control and things that are being driven as part of this process. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a bit of a trial program for more of an economic crisis that will occur down the road. So from that standpoint, it's completely, I think, irresponsible. In an independent Alberta, we could have a proper republic operating such that we don't have any dictatorial need for Emergencies Act or otherwise. So I just see it as just the wrong approach entirely, and I would certainly never advocate it if it was me making that decision. We don't need it. It's being driven by outside forces, not by what common sense, I'll call it Canadians, or in this case Albertans, would want.
I did have another question, but I can't really think of it right now. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, here we are. Here's a question. How much has the Alberta Independence Party collaborated with the FCP or other independence movements that have similar goals and are making the same steps to achieve independence? Good question.
Okay, well, I guess I'd say all I can really say to that is that there have been some discussions with the various other parties. We're always looking to try to figure out a way to align to be able to do that. At this point in time, I know the Alberta Independence Party, just speaking from their the party's perspective, is that right now, as it sits, the Alberta Independence Party is actually the only party that's 100% committed to independence. And it's the only registered party as it sits right now. So whether it's Wexit, Wexit Alberta, not a registered party yet. FCP it's a registered party, but it's equality before independence. So in that context, we say separatists, advocacy groups, everybody who actually is on side with independence, the Independence Party, and the policies that are broad spectrum are what ultimately we think makes some sense. So, I'll tell you that, there's when the drive for independence is there and things start, things will shift with it. So whether it's a particular party that things merge together for whatever given reason that'll occur, that'll remain to be seen. But there can be other things that'll emerge that'll ultimately drive everybody towards one entity that's going to win, because we need an alternate government, and I'll stand behind that no matter what. So Independence Party or otherwise, I'm interested in independence. I have 3 Alberta sons. I want independence. I'm not out here to. I'm not doing this to make money. I'm doing this for the long-term future of my children and the hopes and dreams of everybody else in Alberta. And I've seen people die, and I just can't stand seeing that when I know that we could be so prosperous right now.
I'm back.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't have to be that way for sure, 100%. And that's the same reason I'm doing it. I've seen, like, I live in Calgary, and I've seen it completely transform from like a boom city somewhere where everyone wanted to be, and everybody had a job, and everyone was, pretty
Downtown core
raw for the
is
most part.
scary.
Yeah, no, it's scary.
Yeah.
Alexander, I just want to touch on that a little bit more. On a more personal note, you touched on it a little bit. What was the moment that you knew you wanted to fight for Alberta independence? At what point was the decision made in your mind that enough was enough and there was no going back?
Well, I guess I look back and I say, well, where have I been from? I mean, I was back 2000 and was it 15? I think Prentice made a few comments, and I finally went Zulu on the PC party, and I put up as many Wild Rose signs as I could for the election. And and then I saw, of course, the NDP kicked in, and I realized, oh, I can't believe this is occurring, combined with Trudeau. And then I just realized that none of this works. None of it works. And then as I became more committed, then I started to do my homework and the research and started to realize the colony status that really Alberta is under. We have no real means. Look at Jason Kenney. He begs, he talks, he brings carrots. He's the classic career politician who's doing what he can within I'll call it the I guess the power that he has within Alberta, which really is some, but actually we're really second fiddle to the rest of Canada. And frankly, they don't care. And that's became really clear. So common sense is lost. And so for me, I became a founding member. I realized that, look, we got to do something different fundamentally. Nothing really works anymore. Canada's an illusion. It's not actually the Canada that I grew up in. And I'd like to see the right solution occur ultimately. So I look and I say, well, the simple truth is that a prosperous Alberta will actually be really good for the rest of Canada. It's not somebody wins, somebody loses. But we can also allow, and when I saw it in the election in 2019, and I saw ultimately the entire of Canada, the West went a certain direction in terms of the candidates. Ontario, we saw go Liberal. We saw the Bloc Québécois. We've basically seen exactly what's occurring in this country, which is that people have their own view of how they want to proceed. But we in Western Canada, we in Alberta, we want to do it our way. So we're best off on our own because we can govern ourselves. We don't need Ottawa. Somebody far away, the corporate head office in Ottawa is never going to make the right decision for us as Albertans. And that's why I ultimately realized that there's just no way to go other than independence. Those 4 options that I put up on the presentation. I mean, it just shows you, like, it just always begs the question. Even now, you see Jason Kenney, he talks about, how we're going to have a pipeline. We got the Keystone XL pipeline. $1 billion just get invested with another $6 billion guarantee in loans. That's great. But, we can do so much better. We're dealing with nickels when we could be dealing with dollars. And we could have people back to work overnight. So the exact point in time, I can't really tell you, but I know when I committed to the Alberta Independence Party as a founding 44 member, I said, I have to do this because I actually don't see a future for my kids when it comes to the federal government, how it's operating, how it's become under UN influence, how it's become globalist in nature, how the banking system is not operating to the benefit of Canada. We have a Bank of Canada that operates as a puppet, neutered. We could have zero interest loans that are being that could be issued right now to build infrastructure across the entire country, even reducing the costs of loans to provinces. But that's not occurring. Why? It's all globalist in nature. We need to get our own house in order. We're the last bastion of freedom, and we need to ultimately put that in place in order to turn things around. Because maybe we'll become the light to show others that what's happening out there is destructive, and it's not in the interest of the people. Ultimately, we're going to lose control if we don't actually take control of it now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. Like, the stuff I'm seeing is just insane. And yeah, no, it's the independent Alberta, in my opinion, is our only chance, really. I have another question, a great question from the Black Robe. He says, "I'm a veteran. How can you and your party get the veterans support this separation? Many of us swore an oath to the Queen and still feel loyal to that ideal which we fought for, Queen and country. Can we get veterans back to work? Can we have a militia, which are currently illegal, to bring the veterans back into the fellowship with other veterans?"
That's a great question. Um, I just actually, I really can't comment on that. I just don't have a view on it. I know the Independence Party has not developed detailed policy around that or how things can be approached. What I do know is in a prosperous Alberta, veterans will definitely be taken care of, and it's not just lip service that we see from the federal government. We actually have the ability to do it. So, from that side, I understand the allegiance to the Queen, all of those things, but, I guess we're Alberta patriots or we're Canadian patriots. Um, there's going to be lots of opportunity for all, young and old. Veterans will be taken care of. I really can't speak to it much more than that. I apologize for not being able to be any more detailed than where I am with that.
Yeah, no worries. And then I have a good question for you. So once we are in independent Alberta, how do you see us moving forward with our relationship with both BC and Eastern Canada?
Well, like I say, I think um, regardless, today as it sits, we're essentially 10 provinces, each sovereign on our own. We've had trade issues that have existed since the beginning of time. If anything, it might actually make things because there'll actually be more of a constructive discussion around trade um, and all the various aspects of how to operate in an international community. I don't. BC will be in a place of negotiation at that point. I think a place of strength in a lot of forms. So it's going to align things better just because it'll become more constructive because we'll be dealing with things directly with multilateral agreements with various whether it's provinces or just the rest of Canada, international countries, as opposed to right now really having no say. Federal government driving a lot of things, and so I see that the prosperous Alberta will actually make a prosperous neighbor as well. So I think it actually be a positive thing, not a negative thing. Once we actually get to the vote for independence and we're into that place, then I think things will actually be more constructive as opposed to potentially viewed as a negative.
So Black Robe has another good question. He basically is asking, what do you think about personal defense and firearms rights? So this he's asking your personal view rather than the party's.
On firearms rights. Well, I'm a believer in firearms rights. I'm a believer in, personally in protection of person. If it was me, I would believe in castle law. Nobody steps in my door, and I have the right to defend myself. And the same applies at the rural level. We could actually reduce the amount of police force that we need by actually people being able to actually take care of themselves. Because no police force, I don't care if you have 1,000 people or 500,000 police, they're never going to get there fast enough in order for somebody to defend themselves. So in that regard, that's my personal view. It's up to Albertans to decide how they want to do it. But I'm an advocate for gun ownership, because ultimately the people need to be able to run the country, not the country run them. So I don't want to ever be in a place where there's no guns and the government can control us. So from a libertarian perspective and security, that's my opinion and where I would sit personally.
Yeah, and I will say I know there's a lot of people in here that share that point of view for sure. So yeah, no, definitely appreciate that. Is there any more questions that you guys have? I'm sure that there's somebody that hasn't spoken up here yet. I know we're getting a lot of the same people asking questions. So
Well, how about climate change? Nobody's asked me about that.
yeah, that's there you go.
Okay, well,
What do you
here's the
think?
thing. I'll talk to just a little bit. Me personally, I mean, climate change is affected by the sun, our distance from it, all these other things. Thousands of years and all sorts of cycles always occur. Man-made climate change is a hoax. It just doesn't make any sense. But when I sat in the election last April, and people asked me about climate change, I said, really, what I think is right is actually doesn't matter. What matters is what the majority of Albertans actually want. So, for example, if we have a $15 billion surplus from the funds or more, we have to ask ourselves, well, how are we going to use that money? Are we going to use $15 billion to I'll just say for extreme, put a pipe in the ground and get all this carbon dioxide and just pump it into the ground so that we have no CO2 emissions? And I think the answer is probably no, because people want LRTs. They want they want transit, they want highways, they want all these other things. So at the end of the day, the people will decide ultimately what we want to use our funds for and otherwise. But as far as the actual, democracy and a republic actually will drive the right answer, because we, the people, will decide what's ultimately in our best interests. And climate change, common sense is going to come back here in Alberta and won't have all this external influence that's driving stupid decisions in government, because, hopefully we have more non-career politicians than we have politicians. And I think we should spend less time in government as opposed to more, because the more time there are politicians spending time thinking about things, the more regulations we have, which ultimately makes us less free. So we need to adopt some simple ways of not being in legislature as much. I know places like Montana, they barely even get together. I think it's like every 60 days a year or something, because let's try to keep things as free as possible.
Awesome, and I have another question for you. So, what is the Independence Party's stance on healthcare? I guess if they haven't had any policy, well, actually, even if they haven't, what's your personal view as well?
Well, I think there's two things. The first thing is, as far as social services, in a prosperous Alberta, we have the money to do the things that we need to do. So, as it sits right now, in the existing economy, with oil and gas under pressure and carbon taxes and all these destructive policies, ultimately nurses and doctors, the whole system is going to have to adjust to a lower cost of operating. So that's not necessarily a positive thing. In a prosperous Alberta, where private sector jobs are significant, they're highly paid, you can afford to pay nurses and doctors and folks more than you otherwise would in another province that's in a manufacturing environment. But I think the simple thing that I touched on before is that technology and innovation, social services, healthcare, it's not going to suffer. If anything, it's going to get better in an independent Alberta. Now, this recent COVID situation is always interesting, because in various social services and otherwise, the delivery of services could shift significantly. So we have to actually look at, hey, what's the best way to do things? In a prosperous economy, we should have more private sector jobs than we have public sector. We've got far too big a public sector as it sits right now, and we need to change that. So big boom, big prosperity, innovation, technology change. We should be able to manage ourselves to get our private sector back and growing in a significant way, and ultimately deliver the services that we need. So everybody's getting great healthcare, but it's actually going to hopefully cost us less over time, or at least less per patient.
So another question, in New Alberta, what do you see as being the best way to go, currency wise? Do you think we should adopt the U.S. dollar at least initially and transition to a Buffalo dollar? Go with the Buffalo dollar immediately, which might be unstable for a while, but will possibly, of course, recovery and then go from there, right? And then the third option, I suppose, being going with the U.S. dollar permanently.
Well, I think what ultimately occurs depends on what the timing is and what the lay of the land looks like at that moment that we do it. So, I mean, there's some transition that's going to need to occur. I don't think. I mean, ultimately, the resources that we bring and export from this province will drive the value of that which we have as a people. So, I'm an advocate for I'll call it a bison buck for sake of argument. Alberta dollar will actually prosper in that scenario. The Canadian dollar will likely drop, as for the reasons that I talked about before, the manufacturing side and otherwise. We can do things with our own dollar that we can't necessarily do in other cases. So if we want to, initially we consolidate as much debt as we can into the one through the Bank of Alberta. We get municipal debt down, consolidate everything, get much lower interest rates. We save various municipalities, Calgary, Edmonton. Calgary itself could probably save $100 million just in interest. So, there's lots of incentive to get things consolidated first. Then we can operate, fund our own Bank of Alberta, and then we could start to operate on our own. So I guess I'm more of an advocate of the Alberta dollar than I would be for tying ourselves to the U.S. dollar, because the U.S. dollar can also limit our ability to fund things and otherwise. And why do we want to be tied to another country's currency? At the end of the day, we can be tied to our own, and our success will be driven on the hard work and efforts of Albertans, not whether or not we have a certain currency or otherwise. But the people control their country when they control their currency, and so that's the most important thing. And we have a public bank doing public banking. There's so many things that we can do with that we can't do in a private banking environment. We don't want a private banking system. We want a public banking system.
Yeah, compound interest is the devil.
Yeah, exactly.
I have another question from Spencer. Good question here. He says, so the Fair Deal panel is supposed to release their report today. Are you aware if they had decided to postpone the release? And if you have information about the report, can you speak on its effectiveness in progressing independence?
Well, I'll just say through the group that I work with, the rumor has it that it's going to get delayed because we have COVID. Okay, so it's probably a couple of weeks away before we see anything. My personal opinion, or maybe shared with some as well, is that we're not going to get down the road very significantly with respect to the independent.
Awesome. Wait, did you get cut off there? I'm just double checking. Sorry. Oh, you probably did get cut off, didn't you? Loop.
Hello.
The internet is not being nice to us today, folks.
Well, hopefully that's not a sign of the future.
It's Ottawa. They're to blame.
It's Ottawa. Blame the Liberal government and their censorship machine. Blame- um, that falls under the UN propaganda. What we just said, we are now in contravention of the Propaganda Act. FYI.
I was just about to ask when now's question. Okay, that's a good question.
Yes. Delete.
There have been some things that this guy talked about that I was actually cheering for. It's a good thing that I had my machine muted here because I was just yelling, yeah.
Well, I think the biggest thing is like you can ask as many questions as you want of people,
Okay, there
but
it is.
There we go.
if it comes down to it, it would be the people that would vote, ideally, right, and make these decisions as a whole.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry.
Awesome. So we do have another question from Wen now. This is a good one.
Hold on, you cut off in the middle of the response he was given from our question.
Okay, where did we last leave off?
Oh, sorry. Spencer, can you?
About the fair deal panel and like what the inside rumor is with what's going to go on with that.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know where it ended off, but
You were just talking about how it's possibly being postponed because of COVID.
Right. Yeah. So it's going to get postponed. It's pretty much assured. Probably middle of April. We actually expect that, if we go and we say we're going to have an Alberta pension plan, it'll probably say, well, we'll develop a committee to look at the Alberta pension plan, which will delay it more. And, I think it's just going to be a sequence of delays in order to benefit the Federalist view, in order to move towards more the constitutional reform aspect of referendum on equalization to drive reform. So it's going to be slow. It's going to be slow. We need to repatriate those services as fast as possible. Like there's $70,000 a year jobs sitting in Ottawa, Winnipeg. Well, I guess I shouldn't say, from a Winnipeg or Western perspective, that's Unify the West. But there's certainly jobs that are everywhere else besides Alberta that could be sitting in Alberta right now making $70,000 a year, thousands of jobs. So those jobs need to come back. And so we need to put pressure on that. But I don't think it's going to be anything monumental or otherwise it's going to come out of that panel. At least that's not what we're hearing at this point.
Thank you for that.
Okay. You're welcome.
Sorry about that, Spencer. So next question from Wen now. He asks, what Kenny suggested a North America oil market. What about an Alberta price for our own products? We are few. Royalties could include cheaper energy to fuel our economy. Why do we have to pay the world price or North American price for oil, gas, and fuel products? Would we consider doing this if independent?
Is that question really saying, should we have oil price for Alberta? Is that the question?
I would. Yes, it is. He says.
I don't. At the end of the day, the prosperity of Alberta will be significant. The taxes that we're going to save are significant. I don't. Subsidizing of an oil. It could get looked at, but actually, I don't see that as something where we want to get in the business of subsidizing things. We're actually just better to leave things and let the market decide. Use the free market. Let people drive innovation, do the things that they want to do, create massive prosperity. There'll be so many things that we can benefit from. I think for the average person that's making $20, $25 an hour, $700 a month is going to make them far better off right away. So in that regard, I think we're just setting the right business-friendly, lowest taxes policy on in North America. That subsidizing of something is I won't say not necessary, but it's not needed. There's going to be lots of opportunity for people to progress and do bigger things and that more than offsets any subsidy that would be associated with an independent Alberta.
Yeah, 100%. What was I thinking before? Because I think I had a question. Oh yeah, what do you think? How do you envision the role of First Nations in an independent Alberta?
The role of the Indigenous?
Yeah, yeah. What kind of role are they going to play in governance and in the new country?
Oh, I see.
Your opinion.
Well, I can't really have an opinion on it. I mean, I think when we talk to
That's fair.
Indigenous people, I mean, the the thing about it is that it's not for us to decide how it's going to work. I mean, we need to create a path and a process that works for everybody. So, no special interests. One Alberta. How do we get there? We have to have constructive discussions because there's the aspect of transition from where we are today to the new Alberta, which is not necessarily overnight with respect to the issues that have existed or how we address the treaty related things and otherwise. So it's going to take some development in order to be able to do that. So I just don't think there's any one answer to that, nor could I have really an opinion on it. I think it's got to be a jointly created Alberta in order to bring us all together as one. But at the end of the day, Indigenous people, non-Indigenous people, we should all have the same opportunities. And so, we need to create that bridge in order to get there so that everybody's got the same opportunity. No matter where you come from, if you're an Albertan, you have that same opportunity.
So I have another question. In terms of the foreign affairs, how do you see our relationship with different countries around the world? I guess the major ones being uh, places like the U.S., obviously close to us, but of course there's also Europe, Middle East, Asia.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have no comment. I have no comment on that in general. I think we have friendly neighbors. We need to maintain friendly relationships. We need to create more multilateral agreements that broadens our approach to what's going on overall to our benefit. Okay, we need to win again. It's about winning. So, getting those things right is the most important thing at the end of the day. So if there's certain folks that we just don't want to deal with because we're not winning with them, then we don't need to do business with them. But if there's areas where we prosper and we need to help others, let's help ourselves first, get our own house in order, and then we can go and help some of those other entities. So foreign affairs may mean charitable affairs as much as anything else in order to get countries operating and those that are in despair, refugees or otherwise. Let's focus on getting them the resources to rebuild their own countries, so that ultimately they can be there instead of the cost of trying to bring in people that really are just being dropped off, and it's just not to their benefit. So let's try to help people, but it's multi-element, and we're probably not in a position to deal with that right at this point in time.
I just want to jump in here real quick. If I understood correctly earlier, from your party's standing, you kind of want less government interference in citizens' day-to-day lives, right? As long as it doesn't interfere with or harm others. Am I correct? Did I understand that correctly earlier?
Yes. Well, in terms of the Oath of Rights and Freedoms, I mean, that's correct. I mean, so if whatever you do, every aspect. So if we talk about religion, we talk about um, LGBTQ, you name it. Like from that perspective, everyone can do the things that they want to do as long as they're not a threat to others. So,
because I know we've kind of been going in a loop here, so I just wanted to clarify that people are asking the same question in different forms. So basically, it would come down to a democratic solution. We would decide when the time comes on what kind of country we want to be and what kind of beliefs we want to hold. Right? Vote on it, as you will. But I want to just touch on the here and now and what you think the different groups, like Unify the West, like what we can do right now at this time to further the cause and assist with parties like yours or any others that are fighting for the fair treatment of Alberta, or whether it be independence or a fair deal. What do you think we can do right now?
Right now, that's a great. Um, and I think it's a great question because even the advocacy groups and the different folks that I speak to right now, I mean, we have such a moving target right now. Everything is moving so quick. What existed 6 months ago in terms of the landscape is completely different than today, than probably will be in 6 months from now. So we're in this like very chaotic time. I think every single person who wants independence or otherwise has to actually become active. I mean, this is not going to happen with a couple of people putting some policy together, and otherwise, everybody has to take it on their own. From whether it's Unify the West or whichever group, we have to actually start putting pressure on these career politicians to do something more than nothing. It's just talk. Just talk. We need to repatriate these services. We need to do it now. I write letters. I write letters to various MLAs, and I'll copy the premier, the health minister, you name it, like depending upon the particular issue that exists. But the more pressure that we put on them, the better. So
I agree.
It's very important because right now you got these politicians sitting in Edmonton that you know what, their salary is not affected at all. They just keep operating every day like everything's, the next thing's going on, this and that. No, there's people dying out here, and you guys don't get it.
Yep.
So that's the most effective thing that I can see right now. And get involved. Like, get involved with a party. Do something more than nothing.
I agree. Like, I see it a lot, like on social media. Everybody is just quick to scream, separate now. So I have been trying to teach them how to reach out to their local MLA or their MP. And I say, okay, what are you willing to do to separate? Like, you're on the computer right now. Are you willing to join a party? Are you willing to go door to door handing out flyers? Like, I give them the option. I'm like, what do you want to do? Do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like we got to get more people on the sidelines, and nobody knows what to do. And nobody's like, they're just waiting for somebody to like hand it to them or just guide their hand and to say, do this. Right. So it's kind of difficult. Everybody's screaming, oh, we need separated yesterday. Why isn't this done? Well, it's not something that's going to happen today, tomorrow, or in the next couple of years. This is going to be a long battle.
It is, and it's consistent. So, every single day, you have to wake up and say, "What one thing can I do today to improve the possibility of independence?" So, if it means picking up the phone, if you know your MP, if you know your MLA, and you know the couple key ones, pick up the phone, call them that day, say, "Hey, what are we doing about repatriating services?" Be a pest.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people just won't. They won't reach out. They won't call their MLA. They won't call their MP. Many of them don't know how. So I've started handing them the contact list. Like, here, find your local MP. Write them a letter. Write them a letter once, twice a week. Call them once, twice a week. Double your numbers. Make yourself heard. But like at Unify the West, we're just grassroots. We're not professionals. We're learning as we go, right? So we're trying to educate people and guide people as much as possible, right?
That's excellent. It's what we need. Educating, perish those the lack of knowledge, we will perish, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think I agree 100% with what Jay said. I mean, it comes down to personal responsibility, taking initiative, and being willing to set goals for your personal contribution to independence, and then try to do your best to achieve those goals. And everybody's goals are going to be different, and that's what we need, right? Diversity is our strength, so we need everybody to play to their strengths, and that's how we're going to get this done. I have another question from Ammo here. He says, "What do you see as an advantage to the sovereignty movement, considering the current environment under this COVID event? Do you see that we
Sorry,
could gain from this as a movement in somehow?"
what do we gain from COVID for independence?
Yeah.
Uh, Honestly, it's right in this moment. At this moment in time, there's not a lot. COVID is pretty much shutting down all conversation, other than self isolating and all of the various jargon that's currently going on. But once COVID actually subsides, and then now we're left with the economy and what's really going on. Okay, well, that's a watershed. Like, really, we're kind of in a watershed moment right now. I mean, you think about it. Like, we have 100 million barrels a day of oil on planet Earth that gets used every day. You knock out the airline industry, that's 10 million barrels a day. Like, we're probably down. I was talking to a friend of mine who's pretty knowledgeable in that regard. Figures we're probably like
Oh no, not again.
Well,
That's all good. I think we were probably about to close her off.
That was
I'll
me
give up.
earlier this week.
There's major network issues with Talis. If he's able to return, perhaps we'll get his closing remarks and a message for anybody who sees this stream or recording.
And if you
Just give him a minute.
out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that one. Whew.
So I'll play some background music. How about that?
yeah, play some elevator music.
Some elevator music.
We'll get the groovy
he's gone
button here.
completely. So
No, he's back now. There we go.
Oh, I'm back now. Sorry about that.
Hey, sorry. So if you want to finish your thought, and then I think we're gonna wrap up, and if you have any closing remarks, and then we'll probably just dive into free discussion, kind of about what happened. If you want to stick around, that's awesome. We'll probably close off the stream after you're done your remarks, and I'll just say thanks everybody for watching. Appreciate everybody coming tonight. That was a great town hall, a lot of great information, a lot of, and I really do think you have a lot of passion, CW, and that you're if everybody just had as much passion as you about independence, we'd be there already. But let's close her up.
Okay, well, thanks for those that joined tonight. I feel privileged to be able to share any time around Alberta independence. As I'm passionate about it. I wish we could have it yesterday. I know it's a better way for Alberta. We have this Alberta First group that I talked to you about. We're going to bring out this petition. Really want to get people signed up on this as quickly as possible. We need to drive a lot of momentum and get things going forward, because I don't believe the Fair Deal panel is going to give us any kind of fair deal. I like to call Jason Kenney all hat, no cattle Kenny. So it's a lot of noise, but not a lot of meat on the bone in terms of the obvious solution, which is that independence was actually the best thing we could ever possibly do. Why would we stay in Canada when we can actually benefit significantly, and that the risks of staying are far greater than the risks of leaving, and the benefits of leaving are far greater than the benefits of fighting for the status quo. So if you get a chance, go to Alberta for All with the number 4 in the middle.com. Sign up on that. So at least once I get this petition, I can get this petition to you, Jake, as well anyways, but more people we get connected up to it so we can get these petitions in. Hopefully we can build a really strong force to get it to go through the legislature as quick as possible. And I encourage everybody to do at least one thing every day. Just one thing every day, even if it's small, even if all you're doing is thinking about independence, that in itself is a force. But try to do something, because what I found when I started getting involved, ultimately I'd never wanted to be any kind of career or any kind of politician or even be sitting on this call tonight. But I tell you what, when you start getting going and you do one thing leads to another thing, which leads you into something that you just don't know where your skills can be best used. But everybody's got skills out there. Let's just get them to work so that we can get to independence as fast as we can for the sake of our kids, and our kids' kids, and our families, and eliminate all these people that are dying out there. And let's create prosperity.
And I have one more question just to tag on what you said there. The Alberta for All, that's www.albertaforall. What? Sorry.
.com. Alberta for All. Albertaforall.com.
Awesome. Thank you. And that's for tonight, folks. Have a good night.
Thank you
Later,
for coming,
guys.
everybody. I will be uploading this to YouTube and doing some clip edits and just kind of isolating some of the more important tidbits as an individual video.